Hello, everybody, and welcome back to episode 12 of our investment journey. Yeah, today I, as always, want to make the trade and then let's talk about what happened in the markets. And I want to talk about one thing in particular, and that's the Greenland crisis, which has dominated the news. Yeah, things are happening around AI and many other things, but Greenland really dominated the news. But without further ado, let me go ahead and make my trade. So, as always, the MSCI emerging market it is. And we have the 1,000 euros ready. Let's put in my order here. Check. And boom. Okay, I think that worked. Yeah, perfect. So we are up to 12,700 euros now. So we're up 700 euros more or less. That's amazing. And yeah, despite all the turbulences over the last couple of days, the portfolio is still up, and that just is very good. So yeah, not much to worry about here. So let's look at the markets and what has happened. Now, when we look at the week, we see that the MSCI emerging markets have outperformed the developed world. So they are up nicely while the MSCI world is down a bit. It looks like not much happened in the US, just a small movement, but let me tell you, it was anything but. So, what happened during this week was that the whole Greenland situation came to a head. I did mention Greenland in my video on geopolitics 2 weeks ago, and back then I almost treated it a little bit like a joke. But over the last 2 weeks, it really got serious and it culminated at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Now, in my video, I came to the conclusion that this is something that Trump does out of his narcissism and he wants to create a monument to himself. And it could also be a distraction from all the other bad news that he's surrounded with. And actually, there's a lot that Trump might want to distract from right now. So, first of all, his approval rating is really in the toilet. So it stands at minus 19%. Which is worse than in his first term and also worse than Biden at the same time. There's also this ongoing situation with Epstein. So the Department of Justice has, after heavy pressure, released the Epstein files, but they were heavily redacted. And of course, no one was happy about that. They all want the unredacted files. But somehow, with all the things going on with Greenland right now, it seems like no one's talking about it anymore. So maybe that worked. There's also the situation with ICE. So ICE is doing these raids in Minnesota, getting the illegals out there, and there's lots of news coverage on the situation, and some of it doesn't really look nice. And here you can see some voters who backed Trump say ICE is going too far. So maybe not a positive story for him. And then we got the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court was going to rule whether Trump's tariffs were legal. We expected this decision for this week, but they did not release that decision, and they left this for a future date. So, overall, seems like there's lots of reasons why Trump could use a distraction. But officially, of course, he said something else. He said, we need Greenland for security reasons. We're the only ones who can protect the Arctic against China and Russia. And of course, he would want access to the natural resources there. And what did he do then, after his first announcements a couple weeks ago? Well, he pressured NATO. Tweeted, NATO, tell Denmark to get them out of here now. He also wrote a strange letter to the Prime Minister of Norway, where he said, considering your country decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize for having stopped 8 wars plus. So he's kind of venting and showing his disappointment, again, points to his narcissism. And then he also said he was going to impose tariffs on the countries in Europe that support Denmark and Greenland. So Denmark itself, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, UK, Netherlands, and Finland. And those 10% tariffs would climb to 25% by June 1st if Denmark doesn't sell Greenland to the US, basically. And then the last point was he gave a crazy speech at the World Economic Forum in Davos. He was all over the place. He was confusing Greenland with Iceland. So it was really insane. Now, if we fact check the situation, I think that his arguments don't really fly because Trump and the US can already position military personnel in Greenland, to my knowledge at least, so they can defend Greenland and they can use it as a base. And then if he pressures NATO and tells them, hey guys, maybe we drop Ukraine if we don't get Greenland. So you would give a huge gift to Russia in the form of Ukraine just because you couldn't get what you wanted with Greenland. That makes no sense. Now, when Trump put all of this out there was of course a lot of opposition. And it started in the US. So even Republican lawmakers here, I think this is a Senator, Tom Tillis here, or Lisa Murkowski, they said, not a good idea, not good. But there's also a European reaction. And for once, I'm kind of proud of what the Europeans did. So European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen promised an unflinching, united and proportional response. That sounds pretty strong at least. And she was backed up by Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, who said that the EU should use its anti-coercion instrument. And that's a trade policy tool known as the trade bazooka. Now, I love that. That's the language that Trump understands. And I always complain that the EU appears so weak. Whereas if China gets threatened with tariffs, Xi Jinping says, well, if you impose tariffs, then we're gonna fire back and we're gonna up our tariffs. And that's the game that you need to play. Another thing that the EU could do was stop buying US government bonds. And that would be a huge deal if the US cannot refinance themselves while they are head over heels indebted, then they got a huge problem. And those are the things that were put out there. Now, make no mistake, those things hurt the EU as well. But sometimes you just need to tolerate some pain if you know that it hurts the other party more. And so the EU definitely stood their ground for once. Meanwhile, reaction from Russia? Of course, Russia welcomed Trump's tariffs against his NATO allies. Kremlin officials saying it was evidence that the transatlantic alliance was collapsing. The Russian government newspaper Rossiyskaya Gazeta praised Trump's push to take over Greenland and welcomed the strain it was causing between the US and Europe. So overall, you can see that he got a lot of opposition by his allies and applause from his adversaries. And that ultimately led Trump to cave, I think. So what they agreed on right now was some sort of a framework of a future deal. It's probably something around military cooperation and then access to the natural resources. Now, this whole arrangement allows Trump to save face. In reality, he didn't really get what he wanted, but at the same time, the tariffs are off the table. Now, what's the aftermath of all of this? Well, I think this is a perfect example of a taco trade. This is a term that was coined by different people, and they said, Trump always chickens out. So whenever Trump does something insane, stock markets react to it. But given how unserious he is and how easily he reverses a decision, the stock market drops are often just temporary. The best example were the tariff announcements around Liberation Day. Remember that? The stocks dropped by more than 10% in a couple days, and then stocks rebounded pretty quickly once everybody realized maybe he's backing off of it, maybe he's just using this as a tool to pressure everyone to make a deal. But overall, this was just a temporary dip, so you could have just bought the dip here and made quite a nice profit until the end of the year. And so it's the same exact story this week. The stocks dropped pretty dramatically, and then they rebounded a little bit once he said he was not going to use force. And then once they came out with their framework agreement, the stock markets appeared relieved, and overall it seems like the worst is off the table. So that's what happened during the week. I think it shows perfectly once again that anything can happen, especially with this president, and I rule out nothing right now. The only thing that I can do is keep investing consistently and maintain a long-term perspective. And if you want to watch me do that, follow me, like and subscribe, and I see you next week.